"Get your wife and your son off my aircraft right now, or I will have security remove all three of you in front of everyone on this ramp." Captain Gerald Ashworth did not say those words quietly. He did not lean in and murmur them the way a man says something he is ashamed of. He said them standing in the center aisle of a $90 million Bombardier Global 7500. Loud enough that the sound rolled backward through the cabin like a stone dropped into still water. Loud enough that the galley heard it. Loud enough that the ground crew outside on the tarmac felt something shift in the air before they even understood what had happened. His arms were crossed. His 4 gold stripes caught the morning light coming through the oval windows, and his jaw was set in the particular way of a man who has already made up his mind and is simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up to him. Outside, the Scottsdale sun was already climbing hard over the Arizona desert, and the tarmac was beginning to shimmer with that flat, merciless heat that has no interest in anyone's schedule. Inside, the cabin still smelled like fresh coffee and cold water and leather that had never once been neglected. It was the kind of space built to make people feel like they had arrived somewhere important. Captain Ashworth had just turned it into something else entirely. Victor Bryant stood completely still in the aisle. He was not a large man, not the kind of man who fills a doorway just by walking through it. He wore a plain navy blazer, no tie, no watch, no wedding ring visible because he'd taken it off that morning to have it resized. Nothing that announced money. He simply stood there, one hand resting lightly on his son's shoulder, and the strange thing, the thing that would matter later, was how little his face gave away. 15-year-old Elijah Bryant stood beside his father, doing the exhausting invisible work that children of certain families learn to do far too early, keeping his face blank while something breaks quietly inside his chest. He had his mother's eyes and his father's stillness, and right now, those eyes were doing everything they could not to show what he was feeling. Renee Bryant stood slightly behind her husband and son, her hand tight around the strap of her handbag. She wasn't shaking. She had the kind of composed, careful stillness that isn't calm at all. It's what comes after calm. Once a woman has spent enough years in enough rooms, learning that the only energy worth spending is the kind that accomplishes something. She was looking at Captain Ashworth with an expression that wasn't anger, it was recognition. From row 2, a passenger named Bradley Kessler, silver, reading glasses, a folded copy of the Wall Street Journal, now sitting untouched in his lap, had stopped pretending to read almost a full minute ago. From the galley, flight attendant Camille Rousseau stood frozen with a bottle of sparkling water. In both hands, 26 years old, 3 years into a career where she'd developed the specific instinct good cabin crew develop. The instant when a situation stops being merely uncomfortable and becomes something else, something wrong. And in row 4, a travel journalist named Malik Turner had not moved either. He had covered aviation stories across 3 continents, and he recognized exactly what he was watching. The second Captain Ashworth stepped out of that cockpit. Like a man walking into a fight, he'd already decided he would win. His phone was resting face up on his knee. The screen was on. He had not told anyone. What none of them knew, not Bradley Kessler with his abandoned newspaper, not the flight attendant standing frozen by the galley, not the ground crew outside, exchanging uneasy glances, was that in exactly a few short minutes, the man Gerald Ashworth had just ordered off this aircraft would make one phone call that ended his career. Not with shouting, not with a scene. With 4 words spoken quietly into a phone on a sun-scorched runway in 104-degree heat. Victor Bryant kept his hand on his son's shoulder. His face showed nothing that Ashworth could use against him. No fear. No outrage that could be twisted into aggression. What it showed, if you knew how to read it, was the calm of a man who had stood in rooms exactly like this one before. rooms built to make him feel small, and had learned every single time that the room was wrong. "I'm going to give you one chance to reconsider," Victor said. His voice was so quiet that Ashworth had to lean forward just to catch it. Ashworth did not reconsider, and so it began. "Before we go back to where this morning started, I want to ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room you had every right to be in and felt someone decide, before you'd said a single word, that you didn't belong there? Not because of anything you did, just because of how you looked. If that has ever happened to you, or to someone you love, stay with this one. Tell me in the comments what city you were in, because Victor Bryant is about to show an entire aircraft full of strangers exactly what quiet, unshakable dignity looks like. And by the end of this story, you're going to understand exactly why he never raised his voice once. Now let's go back to where this morning actually began. The private aviation terminal at Scottsdale Air Park sits on the eastern edge of the field, separated from the commercial gates by a security fence and roughly $40 million of private aircraft parked in neat rows on concrete that catches the desert sun like a griddle. On a Tuesday morning in August, with the heat index already past 90, before 8 a.m., the ramp has a very specific kind of shimmer. Not the postcard kind, but the industrial kind, the kind that means serious people expect serious things to run on time. Parked at the north end of the ramp, nose toward the taxiway, sat tail number N228VB. A Bombardier Global 7500, white fuselage gleaming, 104 feet of wingspan, twin Rolls-Royce engines capable of pushing the aircraft across an ocean without stopping. The interior had been refitted less than 2 years earlier, at a cost most people would find uncomfortable to say out loud. Cream leather, hand-finished walnut trim, brushed titanium, 12 reclining seats, and a private rear cabin suite. It had. In the cockpit, Captain Gerald Ashworth was running his pre-flight checklist with the mechanical fluency of a man who had done it 10,000 times. 59 years old, silver hair, cropped tight, 29 years across 3 aircraft types and 2 airlines. His hands moved through the checklist on autopilot. His mind was somewhere else, entirely. Ashworth had landed in private aviation 6 years ago. After his third and final attempt at a senior captain position with a major commercial airline had gone nowhere, passed over in his own private accounting, for reasons that had nothing to do with his record and everything to do with an industry he believed was changing in ways he didn't much care for. He never said it in those exact words to anyone at Meridian Sky Charter. But it was the kind of belief that doesn't stay entirely quiet. It leaks into tone, into the particular way a man's eyes move across a cabin, sorting who belongs from who doesn't. In the galley, flight attendant Denise Whitfield, 46, 21 years in the industry, 18 months flying with Ashworth on and off, had developed her own finely tuned internal alarm where he was concerned. A sense for the exact set of his shoulders that meant today was going to be a hard day. The alarm had started ringing the moment he pulled up the passenger manifest. Bryant, Ashworth had muttered, half to himself, scrolling the tablet. Never heard of them. Denise kept arranging water glasses. Might be new money. Tech, maybe. Make sure they understand cabin protocol before we push back, Ashworth said. I don't want anyone wandering. Denise said nothing, but she had glanced at the booking tier on the manifest. Founder's Access, a designation she had personally seen used exactly twice in her career, and she had chosen, for reasons she didn't examine too closely, not to mention it to him. On the ramp side, 20 minutes east on the interstate, a black SUV carried the Bryant family toward the airport. Elijah had a paperback open in his lap. A worn copy of a classic aviation memoir, its spine held together with tape he'd applied himself because he refused to replace a book he loved. The Global 7500 has a range past 7,000 nautical miles, Elijah said, not really to anyone. We could fly straight to Singapore without stopping. "We're going to New York, baby," Renee said, not looking up from her phone. "I know. I'm just saying we could." Victor smiled, then glanced at his own phone. One message from his chief operating officer, Elena Vasquez, sent at 7:42 a.m. "Everything's set. Crew manifest shows a standard charter client. No ownership flags visible from their end. Report back after wheels up." Victor read it twice, then locked the screen. 6 weeks ago, he had quietly acquired Meridian Sky Charter through 3 holding entities and 2 law firms, and by design, it had generated almost no public footprint, no memo, no welcome call to the operations team. This was deliberate. In every one of the 12 acquisitions he'd made across 2 decades building Bryant Vantage Holdings, he had applied the first principle. Before you change anything, you go in as nobody and you watch. You see what a company looks like when it isn't performing for the owner. You see what people do when they think no one important is watching. The aircraft came into view through the windshield. Elijah pressed toward the glass. "There she is. 228 Victor Bravo." "Let's see how she runs," Victor said quietly. The security gate opened before the SUV had fully stopped. Ground crew was already in position. 2 young men in Meridian polo shirts, the organized energy of people who'd been briefed and intended to do the job right. "Good morning, Mr. Bryant," the senior of the 2 said, easily. "We've got you loaded. Captain's finishing pre-flight." "Thank you," Victor said, stepping out into heat that landed on him immediately. Flat and total, the kind that doesn't build. It simply is. He looked up at the aircraft. Nose slightly raised on its landing gear, the posture global jets always seem to hold, like they're impatient to leave the ground. Renee stepped out beside him, adjusting her bag strap, looking at the aircraft with the composed appreciation of a woman who had learned, over 20 years at Victor's side, to find extraordinary things beautiful without being undone by them. Elijah came out last, backpack over one shoulder, book under his arm, and stopped dead the moment the aircraft's full scale hit him from ground level. "Wow," he said quietly, which was all there was to say. From the cockpit window 20 feet above the ramp, Gerald Ashworth watched the SUV pull in. He had been watching since it cleared the gate. Watching with the particular attention of a man who has already formed a judgment and is simply waiting for it to be confirmed. The confirmation he got was not the one he expected. He'd been picturing tech casual hoodie money or old money tweed, some visible signal of the wealth required to book the top clearance tier. Instead, he saw a black family in ordinary clothes, carrying ordinary bags, walking onto his ramp like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because for them it was. His jaw tightened. He looked down at the tablet. Bryant, Victor, Bryant, Renee, Bryant, Elijah. He looked back up. He looked at the booking tier, Founder's Access, and his mind moved through that information. The way a mind moves through a fact it has already decided must be wrong. He reached for his headset. At the top of the air stairs, flight attendant Camille Rousseau greeted the family warmly. Genuinely, the kind of warmth that isn't a performance but a fundamental way of being in the world. She'd memorized the names off the manifest that morning, along with a small note Victor's assistant had added during booking. "Son is an aviation enthusiast." "Elijah," she said with a real smile. The avionics suite on this aircraft was completely updated last week. New displays. From the galley you can actually catch a glimpse of the glare shield if you lean the right way. Elijah's whole face lit up. "For real? For real. For real." He didn't run. He was 15, raised by a father who didn't run. But he walked quickly, turned at the galley, and craned his neck toward the cockpit without crossing the threshold. He stood 3 feet outside the door and looked at the instrument panels, the way a person looks at something they've been waiting their whole life to stand next to. Gerald Ashworth was out of his seat before 10 seconds had passed. He didn't step out of the cockpit. He pushed out of it, shoulders squared, eyes locked on Elijah with an expression that had already jumped past professional concern into something far more personal. "Get away from the flight deck." Elijah flinched, stumbled back a step, and his book slipped from under his arm and hit the carpet. "I was just back." "Now," Ashworth pointed toward the cabin. "Sit down. I wasn't going to touch anything. I just wanted to see the—" I didn't ask for an explanation. From the storage area where he'd been stowing his blazer, Victor heard every word. He straightened, walked forward, and his face gave nothing away. "He was looking," Victor said. "Flat, not confrontational. Flat the way something sounds when all the extra pressure has been pressed out of it, leaving only the fact." Ashworth turned on him. "I'm the pilot in command. On my aircraft, I don't repeat instructions to passengers." He's 15 years old. He was standing 3 feet from the door. A calm word would have been enough. "I'll determine what's appropriate, Mr." Ashworth caught himself. "Mr. Bryant." The stutter had happened, and in that half-second gap, Victor registered something he filed away without a flicker on his face. Ashworth had reached for a different name entirely, and it wasn't the one on the manifest. Renee sat down in the forward seat, setting her bag on the side table with deliberate calm. She looked at Camille, who stood in the galley entrance, hands empty, expression carefully controlled. In seated 2B, Bradley Keller had fully abandoned his newspaper. He was watching now. Elijah sat, book in his lap, spine straight, staring out the window. His face was composed. If you didn't know him, you'd think he was fine. Victor knew him. And something tightened in his chest that had nothing to do with anger, and everything to do with the specific helplessness of watching your child absorb something. No child should ever have to learn. Ashworth retreated toward the cockpit doorway. He wasn't done. Victor could see that clearly. He'd spent 20 years reading rooms exactly like this one, and this one still hadn't decided what shape it was going to take. He came back 3 minutes later. He had used those minutes to build something. Not quite an argument, more, a framework. A set of words that would let him do what he wanted and call it procedure. "Before we push back," he said to the cabin generally, though his eyes stayed fixed on the Bryants, "I need to run a supplemental security check. Standard for charter bookings that come in through third-party brokers." Camille, who had flown with him 18 months, had never once seen him run a supplemental security check on anyone. She said nothing yet. She was counting. "The FBO already completed full ID verification at the gate," Victor said. "All 3 of us. We came through Founder's clearance." "Ground clearance and flight clearance are 2 separate protocols," Ashworth said. He had invented that distinction on the spot. It existed in no procedure manual anywhere in the company. "I need government identification, all 3 of you. You need to see." Renee started, then stopped herself. A glance passed between her and Victor. He gave the smallest nod. "We've already been verified," Victor said, "but I'll comply." He produced his driver's license. Renee handed over her own. Elijah, without being asked, pulled his passport from the front pouch of his backpack. He'd been taught from the time he was old enough to understand why to always carry it. Ashworth studied all 3 documents with exaggerated slowness, holding each one up, comparing faces to photos, the performance of a man determined to find something that wasn't there. Camille stepped forward. "Captain, I reviewed this morning's manifest. The Bryant party is booked under Founder's Access, our highest clearance tier. Standard procedure doesn't require supplemental verification from crew for that tier. Ground handles full documentation." "Stand down, Rousseau." "Captain, I said, stand down." She stopped talking. She didn't retreat, but she stopped, staying exactly where she was, hands at her sides as present without blocking anything. It was the most the rules allowed her to do, and she did all of it completely. In row 4, Malik Turner shifted, phone resting on his knee. Screen dark, except for a small indicator light no one would notice from across the aisle. He typed without looking down. "Black family. Top-tier booking. Pilot pulling IDs despite full clearance. Flight attendant tried to intervene, got shut down. White passenger in 2B hasn't been asked for anything. He hit go live. Within 90 seconds, 400 people were watching. Names match the manifest, Ashworth said, handing the documents back. But I'm not comfortable with the nature of this booking. I want to understand your party's relationship to Bryant Vantage Holdings. Our relationship to Bryant Vantage Holdings, Victor said, isn't relevant to whether we sit in these seats. Our documents are in order. The booking is paid. What specific security concern are you trying to address? Because so far you haven't named one. Silence. Bradley Kessler set his newspaper down, folded it, leaned toward the aisle. Look, he said, in the conciliatory tone of a man convinced he's being helpful, some of us have schedules this morning. If there's a mix-up with the booking, maybe it's cleaner to sort it out at the terminal so we don't all lose the morning. Renee looked at him. Not with heat. With the particular exhaustion of a woman who has had this exact conversation too many times to find it surprising anymore. No one was speaking to you. I'm just trying to move things along. I know exactly what you were trying to do. The precision of it landed. Bradley looked at her a moment too long, then picked his paper back up and stared at it without reading a word. Ashworth pulled out a tablet and opened an internal security questionnaire. A form created for genuinely suspicious bookings. A form Camille had only ever seen in training, never once in the field. Who referred this charter to your party? A company associate. Name of the associate, irrelevant to flight safety. What's the business purpose of travel today? Personal. Do you have documentation of your relationship to the corporate entity that made this booking? The corporate entity that made this booking, Victor said, is Bryant Vantage Holdings. My name is Victor Bryant. That is not a coincidence. Renee set her water glass down with a small, deliberate click. Captain, she said, are you asking every passenger on this aircraft these questions, or just us? A different kind of silence. Thicker. Bradley didn't look up. Camille pressed her lips together. Malik updated his caption. Pilot now demanding corporate documentation from black family. Has not asked white passenger for anything. Flight attendant told to stand down. Viewer, count past 2,000 and climbing. This is protocol, Ashworth said. It applies where I determine it applies. I see, Renee said. 2 words. She looked back out the window. Then Elijah spoke. Sir. 15 years old, spine straight, book set carefully aside. I've read the federal regulations that cover pilot-in-command authority over passengers. None of them require a passenger to document their relationship to a booking entity. None of them give a captain authority to demand business records as a condition of service. What you're doing isn't procedure. You're inventing it as you go. The cabin went completely silent. Something moved across Ashworth's face that it wasn't embarrassment. A man with his particular architecture of ego doesn't reach embarrassment easily. But something adjacent to it, and far more volatile, the fury of a man caught doing something he knows is wrong, by someone he never expected to know better. Sit down, he said, and nothing else came out. Victor's voice, when it finally came, was so quiet the cabin had to hold its breath to hear it. Do not speak to my son that way. Ashworth stared at him. He found nothing he could use. No fear. No crack he could twist into instability. Just a man looking at him, the way you look at something you've already decided to outlast. He turned back to his tablet. I need documentation. Bank confirmation, corporate registration. Something that proves you're authorized to use this charter. Victor let the demand hang in the air long enough for everyone to hear exactly what it was. You have 3 valid government IDs. A paid manifest with our names on it. A founder's clearance code from the FBO. At what point does documentation become sufficient for you? When I'm satisfied. And what would satisfy you? Ashworth didn't answer. Malik typed fast. Pilot demanding bank records and corporate paperwork from a black family to verify a booking that's already paid and cleared. He's an armed authority in a cockpit, using it to make a family prove they have money. Live count, past 4,000. Denise stepped out of the aft galley, walked to the forward station, stopped, not approaching, just present, hands at her sides, watching the Bryants with an expression that had crossed from uncomfortable into something closer to sick. 19 months flying with Ashworth had taught her the shape of what was happening now. And that procedure wasn't going to fix it, because procedure was never what this was about. Camille tried once more. Captain, I want to formally note that standard operating procedure for Founders Access does not include any of the steps you're currently taking. I've never seen this protocol applied. I'm not comfortable with the direction this is going. Noted, Ashworth said. Now stand down and let me do my job. With respect, I am doing mine. He gave her a look that lasted only a second and meant, clearly, this will cost you. She took it without blinking. Bradley stood, crossed the aisle, crouched to Victor's level, dropped his voice into the kind of confidential register that's actually loud enough for the whole cabin. Look, I'm going to be straight with you, friend. Nobody's saying anything personal. If there's a mix-up with the booking, it's cleaner for everyone, you included, to sort it out at the terminal. No hard feelings. These things happen. Victor gave him 3 full seconds of complete attention. I appreciate your concern for your own schedule, Mr. Kessler. We'll be staying in our seats. I'm trying to help. You're not helping. You're performing. Bradley sat back down. He didn't touch his newspaper again. I'm going to be direct, Ashworth said, tablet in hand, voice hardening into full command. I have responsibility for the safety and harmony of this aircraft. When I have passengers I believe may not belong on a charter of this tier, I have the authority to deny boarding. I'm asking you, as a professional courtesy, to step off voluntarily. Renee looked at him with something that had moved past clarity into quiet finality. We've done nothing wrong. We've shown identification. We've answered your questions. We are not leaving this aircraft voluntarily. That's your choice. Ashworth turned to Denise. He didn't ask. He just looked at her, and the look was enough, the weight of a man expecting his authority to carry even when it shouldn't. Denise looked at him. She looked at the Bryants. She looked at Camille, who was watching her with an expression that was open, waiting, entirely without judgment. Because Camille understood the person in the hardest position in this cabin wasn't the one with the most at stake. It was the one with the least. Denise moved toward the door release panel. Camille stepped in front of it. I won't open it, she said. Her voice didn't shake. They haven't done anything that warrants removal. I won't be part of this. Ashworth's look lasted long enough to mean something. Then he turned to Victor, last chance. Victor looked at his son. Elijah looked back with steady 15-year-old eyes, book in his lap, backpack at his feet. Come on, Elijah, Victor said quietly. Grab your bag. Elijah stood, looked at Ashworth once, not with anger, with something far more uncomfortable, the clear-eyed disappointment of someone who has understood exactly what he's looking at. Renee stood, smoothed her dress, picked up her bag, looked at Camille. You've been exceptional. This is not on you. Camille's jaw tightened. Her eyes went bright. She said nothing. Victor passed the galley on his way out and spoke quietly enough that only the forward cabin could hear, but the cabin was so silent it was more than enough. Enjoy this moment, Captain, he said, not looking back. It's the last one you'll ever have on this aircraft. He walked out. Renee and Elijah followed. Their footsteps were even and unhurried down the aisle, and the only sound after the door shut behind them was the low hum of the auxiliary power unit, and from seat 2B, the very quiet, very controlled exhale of a man staring at the seatback in front of him, refusing to look at anyone. If your chest is tight right now, good. It should be. Because what Elijah just did citing federal regulation calmly and accurately at 15 years old, in the middle of something built to make him feel small, takes a kind of courage most adults spend a lifetime working up to. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done in Victor's seat? In Elijah's? In Camille's? Now let's get back to that tarmac. Because Victor Bryant is standing in 104-degree heat, and he is not angry, he's thinking. And when this man thinks, things change. The heat hit like a physical event the moment they stepped off the stairs. Ashworth appeared at the top, arms crossed, the settled satisfaction of a man who believes he's just won something. Victor stood on the concrete and let the sun land on him fully. For a moment, he didn't see the aircraft, or the ramp, or Ashworth at all. He saw something else. He was 22, a downtown Phoenix office tower, marble lobby, a firm called Ridgeline Capital Partners. He wore his one good suit, a size too large, because his mother had bought it for him to grow into. And the receptionist behind the desk didn't look up when he came through the revolving door. When she finally did, her expression cycled through a kind of recognition that wasn't recognition at all. The recognition of someone sorting a person into a category rather than actually seeing them. Service entrance is around the side, she said. I have an interview, he said, 9:30. Summer analyst, Victor Bryant. She looked at him another second, picked up the phone, waited, listened, set it down. They said to tell you the position's been filled. He said nothing. He nodded, walked to his car, and sat in it a long time. He didn't cry. He opened the glove box, took out a legal pad, and wrote the firm's name at the top. Below it, 2 words. Remember this. 3 weeks later, he learned the position hadn't been filled at all. The interviews had gone on 2 more weeks. It went to a candidate with a lower GPA and no relevant experience. 20 years later, Bryant Vantage Holdings owned 4 of Ridgeline Capital's former portfolio companies. He never once reached out to anyone there. He didn't need to. He was 31. A first-class cabin, a boarding pass for a seat he'd booked 6 weeks in advance. The gate agent stopped him, not the 6 passengers ahead of him, and asked for a second form of ID after he'd already shown his boarding pass. He provided it, calmly, because by then he'd learned to carry 2 forms of identification everywhere, always. He boarded. The man beside him glanced over his reading glasses and said, helpfully, "You know, I think first class is open seating now." Victor showed him the seat number on the pass. The man looked away without apologizing and picked his magazine back up. For 4 hours, Victor worked. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. Work was the one thing in that cabin no one else's behavior could touch. Elijah was 12. A school field trip to an aerospace museum. A docent in a blue polo addressed the teacher rather than the students. Please make sure the kids don't touch anything. Last time we had a group like this through, there was damage to the display. Elijah heard every word. He heard a group like this and understood exactly what specificity had been swapped out for that phrase. That night at dinner, he relayed it in order, without embellishment, not crying, just precise, even at 12. Victor listened all the way through. Then he said, "Do you know what that man was afraid of? That we'd break something?" "No. He was afraid you'd love it more than he did. That you'd know more than he expected you to. Some people build walls around the things they care about because somewhere inside they've decided those things don't belong to everyone. They're wrong. The best way to prove it is to know the thing better than they do, which you already do." The ramp came back into focus. The sun was the same sun. Ashworth was still at the top of the stairs. Victor looked at his son's face and found there exactly what he was looking for, not defeat. Not humiliation. Something steadier, something built over years from legal pads and signed contracts and museum displays and a father who never told his son what to feel, only showed him how to carry it. "Elijah," he said. "Yeah, patience isn't passive. You've heard that before. I understand it differently now." Victor reached into his jacket for his phone. What are we going to do? We're going to let the aircraft tell him first. Back inside, Ashworth had already returned to the cockpit, radio in hand, dictating a clean, confident version of events to dispatch. Uncooperative passengers. Security concern. Pilot in command authority under federal aviation rules. He had no reason to think it would ever be questioned. On the ramp, Victor called his COO. Elena, how's the aircraft treating you? We didn't get to fly on her. A pause. Talk to me. He talked. Precise, unhurried, in order, without editorializing, from Elijah at the cockpit door, through the demands for documentation, through Ashworth's final words before they walked off. Elena exhaled. What do you need? 2 things. Don't contact the crew yet. Give me 10 minutes on the ground before this moves inside the company. And can you push an owner verification notice to the cockpit management display? The kind that confirms an authorized owner was aboard. A pause. You want the aircraft to tell him before you do. I want him to see his own systems contradict him, from the machine he was sitting in when he made his decision, before he hears it from a human voice. I can do that. Give me 8 minutes. Stay on the line. When I'm ready, switch to speaker. Elena. Yeah. Thank you. Let's make sure this is the last time this happens. He pocketed the phone. Elijah watched him. 8 minutes. Then what? Then we go back. Elijah shouldered his bag. Something in his face settled into the thing that comes just before readiness. He really thought he owned it. He thought he owned the sky, Victor said. He never understood that the skies never belonged to anyone. The notification appeared on the cockpit display at exactly the moment Elena promised. No alarm tone, no flashing. Just the same clean administrative font used for every routine owner-level notice, sitting quietly in the corner of the screen. Ogre Access Verificationu, Die Bestätigt Beneficial Ogre. Bryant Vantage Holdings, LLC Afårstraveler, Victor T. Bryant Access Tier. Founders, Unrestricted, Departed Involuntarily Sent Reference, MSC 11147. Ashworth was mid-sentence in his incident report. Passengers failed to provide satisfactory documentation of booking authorization. When the notice populated in the corner of his vision, he read it once. Then again, slower, departed involuntarily. Beneficial owner, Bryant Vantage Holdings. He looked at the tablet manifest. Bryant, Victor, top of the list. A name he'd looked at that morning and decided meant something ordinary. The system was telling him it hadn't. His hands went still on the yoke. Owner-level management systems didn't make errors. They pulled straight from the company's master registry, filed correctly 6 weeks ago by lawyers who'd done their job. The system was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Gerald Ashworth had not done his. He grabbed the radio, bypassing his usual channel, calling operations directly. This is 228 Victor Bravo at Scottsdale. I have an ownership notification I need clarified. The dispatcher on duty had already seen it. She took a breath. Captain Ashworth, that notice is an automatic flag from an owner-level incident. The record it's referencing is current and verified. For clarification, you'll need to speak directly to the COO. A pause. Who owns this aircraft? Another pause. Sir, I think you need to call Miss Vasquez. He set the handset down. For the first time in his career, the cockpit, the one place where his authority had always felt absolute, felt like the least certain place in the world. He called her. She answered on the second ring. Captain Ashworth, she said, in a voice that was entirely composed and entirely cold. I have a system notification I wanted to make sure I understood. Stop talking. Listen. He stopped. Meridian Sky Charter was acquired 6 weeks ago by a holding company called Bryant Vantage Holdings. Every asset in this fleet, including the aircraft you are currently sitting in, is the property of that company. Victor Bryant is its sole owner. He chose not to publicize the acquisition because he wanted to experience standard service as an ordinary client and report back on what he found. What he found Captain, was your version of Meridian service, and he's already reported it back to me in full. Ashworth wasn't breathing normally. The booking tier said Founders Access. There was no indication. Rousseau told you the tier. The manifest had his name. His ID matched the manifest. His documents were clean. I didn't know who he was. That's the problem, Elena said, and her voice didn't rise. It did the opposite, which was worse. It shouldn't have mattered whether you knew. On the ramp, a small maintenance cart came around the south side of the terminal, driven by the FBO manager, Carla Jimenez. No fanfare, no convoy, just a golf cart crossing a scorched runway, carrying the man who owned the airplane back to his own property. Ashworth watched it from the cockpit window, saw 3 passengers, assumed replacements had been arranged fast. Then the cart stopped, and Victor Bryant stood up. Ashworth's hands found the edge of the instrument panel. His body went down the stairs before his mind had finished deciding to. He hit the ramp, and the same brutal heat that had been on the family for the last 20 minutes landed on him too. All at once, with the same flat indifference it gave to everything else. "Mr. Bryant," he said, aiming for controlled and landing somewhere closer to desperate. "I understand there may have been a miscommunication. I acted within my authority and I stand by the safety rationale," Gerald Victor said. First name. No title. The shift was so precise and so complete that Ashworth stopped mid-sentence. Victor held up his phone, screen facing outward. The owner notification, his name, the aircraft number, the words departed involuntarily in that same clean, unambiguous font. "The aircraft told you first," Victor said, voice level. "I wanted you to see that. The system knew before I said a word. The manifest knew. The clearance code knew. You decided what your eyes told. You mattered more than every piece of evidence in front of you." He raised the phone to his ear. "Elena, you're on speaker." Her voice landed on the tarmac with the flat, unshakable weight of something that doesn't need volume to be believed. "Captain Ashworth, I've been on this line the entire time. I heard your call to dispatch. I heard everything since Mr. Bryant walked back onto this ramp. The record is complete." Ashworth's face had drained of its usual color, sweat darkening his collar under the desert sun. He looked older than 59. "The man in front of you," Elena continued, "is the founder and sole owner of Bryant Vantage Holdings, which completed a full legal acquisition of Meridian Sky Charter 6 weeks ago. Every aircraft in this fleet, including the one behind you, belongs to him. His wife and son are listed on the master registry as unrestricted authorized travelers. Founders Access is issued exclusively to ownership-level clients. You removed the owner of this airline, his wife, and his 15-year-old son from a plane they own. In front of a working journalist who has been live-streaming this entire incident to an audience approaching 30,000 people. You did this after a flight attendant formally objected. Twice. And before they left the aircraft, and I am quoting the audio record, "Our systems have already logged. You said, 'Some people just don't know where they belong.'" "I didn't," Ashworth started. "The timestamp is in the log, Captain. Please don't finish that sentence." He didn't. The ramp went very quiet. Carla stood near the cart with her tablet, saying nothing. Elijah stood behind his father, watching the man who had thrown his family off their own aircraft, with the specific, complicated expression of a 15-year-old who has just seen the machinery of something he's always known about, laid bare, undeniable. "I want to be clear about something," Victor said, and though his voice wasn't loud, it carried, because the ramp was silent and there was no hesitation in it at all. "I'm not doing this because I'm angry. I'm doing this because my son heard you say his family doesn't belong. Because my wife had to justify her presence on a paid, fully cleared booking. Because your flight attendant did everything right and you told her to stand down. Because a journalist has been recording since the 4th minute, and 30,000 people have now watched you tell a black family they don't know where they belong. Ashworth looked at the ground, then back up. I built my career on safety, he said, something raw slipping into his voice that hadn't been there before. 29 years. Not one sustained complaint. 2, Elena said. 2 sustained conduct complaints in your file, filed in the last 19 months. Both from Camille Rousseau. Both involving passengers subjected to scrutiny she couldn't tie to any objective security concern. Both were reviewed by a supervisor and shelved without action. That failure will be addressed. But you were never operating without a record, Captain. You just assumed no one was watching. Mr. Bryant, Ashworth started, and then Mr. Hayes, and stopped because he'd done it again, the wrong name, a placeholder name. Even now, standing in front of the man who owned the company, some part of him still hadn't fully accepted who was standing in front of him. Bryant, he corrected. Victor didn't address the slip. He let it sit exactly where it landed. I accept that you didn't know who I was, he said. I mean that exactly as I say it. What I don't accept, what I have never accepted, and never will, is why it mattered. You saw a black family on a private jet and decided, before we said a word, that something was wrong. That's not a security decision. That's a decision about who gets the benefit of the doubt and who has to earn it. Camille documented that pattern twice. My son heard it this morning. 30,000 people just watched it happen. Elena's voice came through the phone, final and unhurried. Captain Ashworth, your employment with Meridian Sky Charter is terminated, effective immediately. Your credentials are being deactivated as we speak. Miss Jimenez will collect your badge. You are no longer authorized on any Meridian property, aircraft, or affiliated facility. Silence. Ashworth reached up and unclipped one epaulette, then the other, and set them down on the bottom stair. 2 pieces of fabric and metal, representing 29 years of authority, surrendered in 11 seconds. Carla stepped forward and took his badge and credentials with both hands, formally, because the formality was the only thing that felt adequate, even though it wasn't enough. Elijah watched every second of it, filing it away, not as a weapon, but as knowledge, the kind that changes the shape of what you build afterward. Now, he said quietly. Victor put a hand on his shoulder, the same place it had rested in the cabin when this had all begun. Now, he agreed. We go fly. Bradley Kessler came down the stairs a few minutes later. He'd watched the whole confrontation through the oval window without hearing a word, but he'd read the shape of it clearly enough. He crossed the ramp with his briefcase in hand. I want to say something, he said. In the cabin, I made assumptions about what was happening and about what would be cleaner. I said things I shouldn't have and didn't say things I should have. I know the difference. He paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I appreciate you saying it, Victor said. What you do with it after today is what'll actually matter. Bradley nodded, didn't offer a handshake, understood somehow that this moment didn't invite one, and walked to a waiting car. Camille came down next, not because anyone asked her to, but because there was something she needed to say, and the aircraft wasn't the place to say it. Her composure had finally slipped. I should have been louder, she told Renee. I should have. Camille, Renee said, the way you say a name when you want someone to stop and actually receive something. You did what was right every single time you had a choice. You stood in front of that door. You told your captain the correct procedure when nobody else in that cabin was saying it out loud. That's not a small thing. This morning, it was the largest thing in that whole cabin. Camille's composure broke, gently, and she let it. Malik approached carefully, having already ended his live stream a few minutes earlier. A decision he'd made on his own, sensing the moment had shifted from public accountability into something more private. I didn't know who you were, he told Victor. I want you to know I filmed it because it was wrong, not because of who you turned out to be. I know, Victor said. That's exactly why it matters. A reserve captain, Alicia Moreno. 41 years old, 7 years with Meridian, 4,000 hours before that flying regional jets arrived 14 minutes later. She came up the stairs, paused at the cabin door for one breath, and addressed the family directly. Mr. and Mrs. Bryant, Elijah. She held her cap at her side. I've been briefed, not on what someone decided happened, on what the record actually shows happened. I'm sorry your morning started this way. Elijah studied her for a moment. What are your total flight hours, Captain? 9,412, as of last week. Do you know the Global's max certified altitude? 51,000 feet. We'll cruise at 43 today for fuel economy on the New York routing. Something in Elijah's shoulders came down, the specific tension of a boy who'd just been told, hours earlier, that he didn't belong in a space he'd studied his entire life. Now standing in front of someone treating his knowledge as currency instead of suspicion. Okay, he said. I'll take the window seat. Alicia smiled. I'll let the first officer know. He's an enthusiast, too. You two might get along. They pushed back a few minutes later. The takeoff was everything a Global 7500 promises. Smooth, immense, then suddenly weightless as the nose lifted, and Scottsdale fell away beneath them, into haze and heat and distance. Elijah kept his palm flat against the window the whole climb. We're flying, he said. We're flying, Victor said back. Renee reached across the aisle and took her husband's hand. You good? She asked. Not the reflexive version of the question, the real one. He actually thought about it. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'm good. Gerald Ashworth's termination was fully processed before the aircraft crossed into New Mexico airspace. He applied to 7 private charter operators over the following month. None called back. The incident report followed him into every one of those conversations, the way certain decisions follow a man permanently into every room he tries to enter afterward. The Federal Aviation Administration opened a review into his conduct after the footage, by then viewed more than 3 million times, came to their attention through a formal complaint filed by Meridian's own leadership. He never flew a paying passenger again. Camille Rousseau was promoted to lead cabin director for the Phoenix base within the month. Not, as Elena was careful to note publicly, as a reward, but because she'd been performing at that level for 2 years, and it was past time the title caught up to the work. The 2 shelved complaints in her file were formally reviewed. The supervisor who'd buried them was addressed directly. Elena ordered a full audit of conduct records across the entire fleet, not because Victor demanded it, but because she understood, without being told, that this was simply what running a clean company required. Denise Whitfield came back from a short leave of absence 6 weeks later and asked for a different crew rotation. She got one, no questions asked. The real change was smaller than any of that, and it lasted longer. 6 weeks after the flight, Elijah Bryant stood in the cockpit of N228VB on the ground in the maintenance hangar, Captain Alicia Moreno beside him, and put both hands on the yoke. He didn't fly it. That wasn't the point. The point was that a cockpit had opened its door to a 15-year-old who'd been told in that very aircraft that he didn't belong. And this time, no one told him to step back. He wrote about that morning years later in a college application essay, and it read, in part, "My father could have ended it in the first minute. He had every tool to do it. He waited instead. Not because he was afraid, but because he wanted something bigger than the situation to end. He wanted the man to understand, not just to lose. I used to think patience was what you did when you couldn't act. My father showed me it's what you do after you've already decided, while you give the world time to catch up." Victor Bryant never gave an interview about what happened on that tarmac. He never needed to. The footage did what it did on its own, and the record, the real one, the one that couldn't be talked around, did the rest. That morning didn't change who Victor was. It, Gordon, confirmed it. He had spent 2 decades building things that couldn't be denied, and surviving rooms that tried to deny them anyway, had converting every closed door into another company, another acquisition, another page, filled out in a parking garage a long time ago. He had learned, at a cost he never talked about, that the most lasting answer to a locked door isn't to break it down. It's to own the building. Some people spend their whole lives demanding to be seen. Victor Bryant spent his making things so real, so undeniable, that the world eventually had no choice. And when it finally looked, really looked, all it found was a man who had been there the whole time. Patient, purposeful, and flying. If this story moved you, if Victor's patience, or Elijah's courage in that cabin, or Camille standing in front of that door meant something to you, that's exactly what it was supposed to do. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that nobody gets to decide your dignity for you, no matter what uniform they're wearing or what authority they think they hold. Tell me in the comments which moment hit you hardest. Elijah citing federal regulation at 15, Victor standing quietly at the bottom of those stairs, Camille refusing to open that door, or that one sentence Ashworth thought no one would remember. Because these stories were never really about the aircraft or the ownership papers or the reveal. They're about the choice. The one Victor made, over and over, without ever raising his voice. The one Camille made in that galley. The one Elijah made when he picked his book back up and held his face still. The choice to hold on to your dignity when a room tries to take it from you, and to build something so undeniable that the room eventually runs out of ways to question it. This story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, and events are entirely products of the imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental.